Hello, and thanks very much for coming back and joining us again. This video, what I'm going to be looking at is a brand new kit that we've got. It's been a little while coming. It's a tube-based kit, but it's a little bit different. And I'm going to say at the very beginning, when I first saw the kit, the first thing that went through my mind is how on earth do you put that together? You look at it and you think, oh, that looks really nice, and then you think, how do you actually make it? And I'm going to say a great big thank you to Bob at Guyler Wood Pens in Dorset, because I sent him one of the kits with my original instructions, and he made a beautiful one, which he's pleased to say he subsequently sold and had people really quite keen on buying it when he took it to a craft fair. But he looked at what I'd done, and with his comments, we actually managed to adjust the bushings, and I had some extra bushings made because, as I say, this is a slightly unusual kit. And I'll show you one of the kits in a second, but before we do, I'm going to show you the packet, because to start with, it looks like just like any other tube-based kit. And I will stress at this point, you can turn it like any other tube-based kit. But let's open the packet, have a look at what's inside, and then we'll go through the process of exactly how it's made and assembled. So here is the pack as it comes, and it all looks fairly standard and straightforward. There is a tube. It's a 9.5mm tube, not a 7mm tube, so it's a little bit bigger than most letter openers to start with anyway. We have a chrome end piece, which is fairly standard, but what I will say is these are a nicely made kit. They've got a good quality thick coating of chrome on these. And the blade, which comes, even the packets, to be honest, are nice quality. There's the blade. It's not an unusual shape for a letter opener, but again, it's quite a nice sturdy blade. This end's certainly quite heavy. I think each kit weighs in the region of about 40 grams, I think, something like that. The end unscrews like so, and you've got this part here, so it's easy to push into the finished kit. All fairly standard at this point. But if I delve a little bit further into the packet, you'll see that what I've got here is a little bag with 4 chrome rings in. And that is why, surprise surprise, we call it a 4-ring letter opener kit. I'll pop those on there, hopefully you'll be able to see that okay. And what you can do with these kits, here's a couple I've already made. This one's made in walnut, with the rings spaced evenly along the handle. Here's one I've done in an acrylic, and that's got 1 ring up here, 2 rings in the middle, and 1 ring up here. There's a variety of configurations that you can make for these, and it makes them really quite unique, or certainly gives you the opportunity to make them unique. Now, what you will need to make these kits, and this is quite important, is a 9.7mm drill. We don't sell tools, but we do sell things like drill bits that are specific sizes for our kits. So 9.7mm, and you will also need a set of bushings, and these bushings are unusual. We have 2 fairly standard looking bushings that you'll see there, not dissimilar to many pen kit bushings, but we also have a 3rd one, and this is called an interstitial bushing, and I'll show you why it's called an interstitial bushing right now. If we take our brass tube and pop it on there, we can take our interstitial bushing, and it actually fits onto the tube, and the other one fits at the other end. So the configuration when it comes to turning it is like that, with the wood parts in here. And the reason it's done like that is because, and this is where it got complicated, when you think about the rings, the first thing you think is, or I thought is, well, it looks really nice, but how on earth do you turn that when it's glued onto the tube? Because if I turn or catch a tool on any of those bits of chrome or sand it, I'll ruin them. And you're absolutely right, you would. And the way we get around it is by doing it this way, but we don't glue it. We're going to cut the blanks, put them on here, and I'm going to show you the most difficult way of doing it, and that's with 5 individual pieces. That's that. So we've got 5 equal pieces of wood with the 4 chrome rings in between. This is without doubt the most difficult way of doing it. That's quite a lot easier, and you could have the 4 rings all together. You can have whatever configuration you want, and there are some photographs on the website of some of the configurations that we've done. Now the next question you may ask is, if we're not gluing the blank onto here, how on earth are we going to actually turn it? And the answer is by the use of this interstitial bushing. The tube length is 56 millimeters, so that's really the length that we're looking for. If we add up the length and you don't have to do this because I've done it for you, the length of all 4 of those chrome rings together is 6 millimeters. That interstitial bushing is 7 millimeters. So if you have a 50 millimeter blank, and that's what you're aiming for, in whatever configuration, 5 by 10 millimeters or 2 25s, whichever you might want, a 20 and a 30, it should add up to 50 millimeters. With that on the end there, what we get is a tiny little bit that sticks out of the end. And when we put that bushing in there, what it does, it actually compresses the parts on there ready for turning. So we have to compress it in order to turn it. Hopefully that's fairly clear, but it will become clearer as I go through the rest of the video and show you all the steps that we do to making it. As I've said, if you feel that this is beyond you, you don't have to use the interstitial bushing. You can use the kit exactly as standard. Don't worry about the chrome rings, and you can glue it on without any problem at all. But one of the advantages of doing this is because we're turning it without gluing it, if you do make a mistake, you can take it off and do another one, no problem at all. So I've got a blank which is quite an old bit of cherry. Let's have a bash and see what we can make with this. Now what I've done here is I've actually locked the, I'll zoom out a bit, you can't quite see the chuck. I've locked the chuck off so that isn't moving. I've put the blanket in here and I've actually marked one of the sections here. Now I'm going to cut this drilled blank into 5 equal sections, 10 millimeters each. And what I'm actually going to do, rather than cut it on the bandsaw, you can cut it on the bandsaw if you want, but I've just got a new Japanese saw. I'm actually going to cut it by hand. It is important that you get these absolutely level, otherwise they won't fit together properly. You'll be able to turn them okay, but when it comes to assembling the kits, they won't be quite right. This really is a matter of accuracy and getting all these absolutely level. I'm measuring just fractionally over 10 millimeters because I'm cutting exactly on that line. So there's a little mark, and then I'm using the square just to square that off along the top. And when you do these, rather than mark all of them together, which might give you the wrong sized pieces, mark them one at a time. It's a little bit tricky with the set square as the piece gets shorter, but it'll get you an absolutely accurate piece each time. If you mark them all out first and then cut, you're losing probably about 1 millimeter. I'm guessing about 1 millimeter with this Japanese saw. So you're going to end up with the wrong length, and the length is really important on these. And here we have, hold those up to the camera so the camera can see, five bits there. I'm going to put all these together and measure them just to make sure that we've got the right sizes. If 1 or 2 of them are slightly off, and bear in mind I've cut these by hand, on a bandsaw it would probably be much easier to set it up and get it smack on. I'm just going to give them a little sand off just to like deburr the edges. I've got slightly more than I need to, so I'm going to just probably give each one just a light sand. I'm going to put a bit of sandpaper on the lathe bed and just run each one across just to remove that slightly. But it's important that the minimum that you go to is 50 millimeters. If you go less than 50 millimeters, it won't work. So those looking really quite even at the moment. We'll just have to pop the calipers on them again and just get them the right way around. It helps. And just double check the length that we have. The camera will pick that up. 50.24, I think. 50.26, I beg your pardon. There we go. So that's pretty much spot on. So I've got, I'm actually using a compression mandrel today, and what I'm going to do is I'll try and put it on here so you can see what I'm doing okay. So the first piece I'm putting on is standard bushing for the kit. I'm then putting on the brass tube. Please note, I am not gluing the wood into the tube. You can't glue the wood onto the tube. It has to be turned first and finished, taken off and then glued, otherwise you can't get the chrome rings in the middle. And I'm going to start off by putting, I think I'll put 3 of the pieces of cherry on there. I'm then going to take what's called an interstitial bushing. That means it goes in the middle of. As an interstitial bushing, it goes onto the tube, so a little bit unusual. And then my final 2 pieces of cherry on there, and you should see that, actually I'll take that off and just hold that up to the camera. You should see that the wood is just a millimetre or so just over the end of that, and the reason for that is because in order to turn these properly you need to actually compress the wood or the blank onto here, otherwise it will just spin on top of the tube and you won't be able to turn it. So we've got that on there, we'll slot that down there. I'll pop my other spacer on there, and we'll then bring up the tail piece, lock that off, and we'll compress those pieces, and we're now ready to turn. A reasonable compression on there, lock that off, and we're now ready to turn the piece and finish it as we want to. Now I've got my interstitial bushing in the middle there. You don't have to have it in the middle. You can put all the wood up to one end and have the interstitial bushing next to the other bushing if you want to. It's entirely up to you where you put it. What I will say is that if you have all the wood together, if like me on pens your turning isn't that brilliant, it's important when you take these parts off that you take them off in order and put them back on in order when they're glued. Otherwise, if there's any discrepancy, and I can see I've got a tiny little curve in this part here, any little discrepancy, you will see that on the handle. So having finished this, and I'm not spending a long time polishing and making this all super duper at the moment because that's not what this video is about, but I'm now going to take this off and we'll look at reassembling this with the rings in between. So I've taken off the mandrel. I can now take the bushings off and the individual wooden parts very carefully. Make sure you don't squash them because, as we know, they're quite thin, and I'm taking these off in order, as you'll see. You don't have to take the last one off if you don't want to. And we can now look at putting the rings in between each of the sections. Hopefully you can see this, because unfortunately I can't watch the camera while I do this. I have to look at this. And there we have, hopefully you can pick that up okay, the turned cherry with the rings in between. All we need to do now is lightly sand the tube underneath and put a tiny amount of glue. You don't need to glue the chrome parts in the centre, to be honest. Even if they spin, they might spin, but even if they spin it doesn't really matter because they're exactly the same all the way around. No one would notice. So for the assembly, I'm going to unscrew the blade like so and pop that into the head section of the blank that we've just done. And if I was organised, I'd have got this out of the package already. We're then going to pop in the tail section, and I'm just going to compress these together on the mandrel all at the same time. I'm not going to over compress it, just enough to pull the kit together. So there we have the handle bit, and now we'll just screw the blade back on there, and there we have a cherry 4-ring letter opener. So there we are, a slightly unusual kit. There's the cherry one that I've just made, you've seen me just make. I've done one in walnut as well. I was having a practice when the kits first arrived. I've also done one in acrylic. I've yet to try one in corian, but I'm going to try that fairly soon, because I have to say I do like corian to turn with, but corian's only 12 mils thick. I might have to glue a couple of pieces together in order to do that. And you'll see the configuration on that one is different. I've got one ring up this end, one ring up that end, and two in the centre. That, to be honest, you can get a bit more shape with, but it's down to personal preference. You can, you know, the purpose of this kit is you can put these wherever you like. So thanks very much for joining us again. We look forward to seeing you at the next video. Any questions, drop us an email. Please visit the website, and we'll see you soon. Safe turning. Bye bye for now.